Well, hi, I'm Hinek. You may or may not know me, but if you've heard anything from my Hinek and it's related to Python, it was probably me. I tweet, I code, and I work at Media, which is a small provider, registrar, web hoster in Potsdam, where everybody of you should get your domains. And I'm not here to talk about me, but about log entries. So, what is a log entry? I'm going to claim that a log entry is an event, because you log that something happened, right? This is an event. As in itself, it's rather useless. It's maybe a metric or something like that, but it doesn't help you really a lot if you need to debug a problem. So, you probably want to add some context, which makes log entries events in a context. This would fulfill both premises. And when I went a bit wild with the date, I've seen such log entries. So people write prose as logs. They do that all the time. They use format strings, and it's happening everything. So the problems with it are pretty obvious. It's hard to parse. So for computers, it's basically impossible to read this. And it's also hard for a person to read it, because you have to actually read everything to comprehend what it's saying. So let's talk about good log entries instead. What's a good log entry? A good log entry contains all data that's available to you, and it may help you to debug a problem. The second example provided that, but a good log entry is also easily comprehensible. Because if you have data and can't use the data, it's useless. So, another example, which is basically the same data as before. There's nothing new or nothing less, it's the same. Except, as a person, I can read it much easier. And a computer, even better. The thing up there, that's a TIE-64, which is Temps Atomique International, something what Daniel Bernstein pushed a lot. It's basically a timestamp that is very precise, and it will not explode at 2038 when the Unix timestamp will go over. So, why do you care about the machine readability of your logs? It's because nowadays, if you are deploying a halfway important or big application, the primary reader of your logs is not a human. It's one of these guys here. And these are just the most popular ones, being Logstash and Graylog. You can use them together too, it's great. There are hosted solutions, Loggly, Splunk, whatever. It's important for these, it's easy to read. So let's go a step even further and do this, because computers love formal structure. Let's give them formal structure. In this case, it's easily recognizable. It's a JSON dictionary, and there you have your TIE-64. And in the case of Logstash, you can just say the first part is of TIE-64, the second part is JSON, and by that you get this. You can this data gets split up, and it's easily searchable, analyzable using Elasticsearch. So then you can ask questions like, what did user X do between 12 a.m. and 1 p.m.? Stuff like that. You get pretty graphs. You can correlate the data. Yes?
Do they have to configure to give this graph, or is it just that you have to provide the syntax of the format and it already gives you this?
Okay, this is like the question has several parts. So obviously these graphs don't come out of thin air. You have to. Let's stay at Logstash, which is the simple one. You have a log. It's called a program that parses your logs, which you tell this is the timestamp. This is JSON, and this will send the data structured to here. And this you get for free. You don't have to configure it anymore. The configuration consists of timestamp JSON. The backdrop of that is if you if you change the format of one of your fields, it will explode, because in the behind it's Java, and Java doesn't have mixed lists and stuff like that, but this is minutia. But yeah, if you tell it this is JSON and it has this structure and it can work with that structure, so the answer is yes. So okay. So one popular possibility too is to just use log slash for parsing and splitting up, and using Greylog for searching and analyzing. But once you go down this rabbit hole, you will see many possibilities. Definitely, this is much better than grabbing your logs, and this is much better than grabbing irregular logs.
Have you thought about using systemd journal for this? It's almost the same idea as the structure, a wider structure.
Yes, but it's an orthogonal problem or solution. It's not like first of all, systemd is not available to Ubuntu, really. That's where it starts. Yeah, it works with structure, and the first issue I got is that I should support directly systemd journal, but it's two different things in this case. Anyhow, so for us it's impossible to use systemd because we are running our servers in Ubuntu, so the question doesn't arise at all. But in any case, you need to get the structured data into systemd. And that's what this talk is about in the end. I'm not really talking about this. This is just to show you what are the benefits of structuring your data. What are the benefits of having your logs in a certain format that machines can read. This is not a tutorial log slash. I'm switching gears immediately. So, putting it into practice. So, how do you achieve logs that are machine readable so you get these pretty graphs and search interfaces? I think everybody was at some point here. So if you look at GitHub or something like that, this is the default way people try to structure the data. And it's still much better than writing prose. And people write prose. It's happening. But the flaws are pretty obvious. It's error prone. The format is tied to your application. It's repetitive. So let's try this. This is slightly better. At least it's a little bit less error prone, but still you have the formatting boilerplate in your application, which I consider rather anti-pattern. But it's still repetitive. Whenever you log something out and you want to keep the context with it, you have to write it out every single time. So the next step. Now you have at least got rid of JSON dump s from your own application, but in this case you would lose access to the logger, which is another drawback, which may or may not concern you. It's a problem, for example, if you're using log levels, which I don't consider a really good thing. But sometimes you want to access the logger and you lose it. And even if you have this, which gives you key value logging, it's still repetitive. So you want to log out more fields. Good luck remembering at every part to add it to it. And if you're a little bit like me, you will forget it at some point, or write or a typo or something like that. It's just error prone. So the solution I used before I started to solve it properly was having closures. For example, this is like in a view. So you write your little closure and call it from there. And the data that you want to have with every log entry is just in there. And that's, again, a lot of drawbacks. It litters your views, formatting is still sort of tied to the application, and you can't add key values which you want to log out every time. Because if they are defined afterwards, I mean, this is an order problem. So you can log out variables only which you know that will be defined at the point of your first logging call. So as a summary, there are two problems. The one is formatting, which I'm going to claim is the easy part. So getting out JSON, that's easy. You can get it with standard library logging. There's even a recipe and a cookbook. But the harder problem is context. How do you keep context? How do you avoid this repetitive repeating of your variables? And fortunately, I have a solution for both problems. I don't expect anyone to replace all their logging with my solution, because that's not going to happen. If you have several thousands of source lines, you are not going to embrace something completely new. So I wrote a solution which wraps the existing solution. So it works also perfectly in frameworks and stuff like that. Because I work with Pyramid and Twisted, so I can't just write something that works on with standard library logging or with Twisted. So the key feature of struct log, or the key part, is a bound logger. A bound logger consists of your original logger. As I said, we're just wrapping the existing solution. The interesting part is the context, which is also part of the logger, and you can bind to this context. And as soon as you decide to log out an event, this context gets combined with the event. The event obviously overrides context keys. So, and as the next step, this combination of the context and of the event, which I call event dict or event dictionary, gets processed by a chain of processors. And until the very, very end, it's all dictionaries, it's all structure, there are no strings. And every processor gets 3 arguments: the logger, the name of the logging method, and the current event dictionary. And it returns the new event dictionary. And this new event dictionary gets passed into the next processor. And obviously the last one has to adapt this event dictionary to something your original logger understands, which in the beginning will probably be a string, but at some point maybe it will just send out a package or something like that. So how does it look in practice? So, look, this is the pitch from the homepage, so maybe if you've read ahead, you have seen that. This is using a convenience function, getLogger, which relies on some configurations in global state. Otherwise, there is absolutely nothing special about this. Basically, what this shows you is that the logger becomes your context carrier or your closure. And what I find pretty interesting too is that this log objects, there are 3 separate objects. The loggers are by default immutable, and every binding returns a new logger, which has really nice properties, especially in regards to testing and general robustness. Immutable data is awesome. So let's try a more realistic example. It should be this. Let's have this imaginary pyramid view once more. At the beginning, you have some data which you have always, like the user agent and the peer IP. You bind it to your logger, and it's available for every single of your log calls. Then maybe there's something optional, and you want to have it in your logs only if it has been specified. So you do this. You add another key value to it. And if something happens, you log it out, and in this case, you have some additional value you want to log out with it, just add it to the event. So, how does this witchcraft works? This is it's basically just some configuration, which actually is really absolutely optional. You can get away without any global state whatsoever. You can get with only local immutable structures. In this case, you're defining your chain of processors. The first one looks for a key called exeinfo. If it's true, it pulls the exeinfo from sys. If it's a tuple, it tries to format it, and it removes the exeinfo key and inserts a new key value called exception and a nice formatted string of the exception. The second one, JSON renderer, guess what it's doing? It's rendering the result to a string, and afterwards it gets handed on to your original logger, which in this case would be a standard library, which is directly supported. This is something which is, depending on the philosophy, awesome or an abomination. For convenience purposes, it's possible to use thread local storage for your context. What does it mean? It means that you don't really have to keep your logger object around, and everything you bind to your context is available within that thread or the greenlet. So yeah, it's quite a lot of global state, but it means that if you bind some values to the logger in your view, and you log out some event in some sub-library, you have all the context with it. So I don't use it, but some people like that because it's really convenient. And the logger factory, yeah, it's just does a bit of magic to so certain things work. But it also enables you to use own loggers, which may or may not have some semantic functionality to it. So, how do processors work? As I said, it gets 3 arguments: the logger, the log method as a string, and event dictionary. In this case, we just add a value. Done. It's this simple. It's just a callable. And since classes can be callables too, maybe you want a conditional drop, or maybe you don't want to have your monitoring system in your logs, which I usually don't want to have. I used to have to work around within the application itself. No, in this example, you would just set it to some value, and whenever the peer equals the peer you want to ignore, you raise a well-known exception called drop event, and that gets caught by struct log, and the log entry gets silently dropped. It's really that straightforward. It's really just values in, values out, and if you want to drop something, raise drop event. So, as said, it perfectly works along with existing loggers. You can just start dropping your own loggers you have, and it works like before because the events are freeform. So if you replace the logger object you had before, which you just logging.getLogger, through a struct log logger which drops this logger, your application will work just as before, except that you will get event equals and the whole string. Then you can start breaking up your log entries. So that's a smooth transition, and you don't have to break anything. You can write your own loggers. That's what I mentioned before. Something like user error, which is always a warn level, and you set a key user error equals true or something like that. You don't have to decide on your log levels before. You can just decide this is a user error, this is a system error, whatever, and then just decide on the log level inside your loggers. It's just up to you. It's just a nice convenience. And it's really just dictionaries. That's what I like about it. It's dictionaries until the very end. You can mutate them, you can change them, you can add to it. It's all you're free to do whatever you want. And that's it. So, again, I'm Hinek. I work for Varimedia, and I would appreciate if some of you would check out Structlog. Olga Krekel likes it. He's last time I checked, he's using it for his DevPy server. And yeah, come to Freenode. The channel's a bit empty at times, so I could use some more community. That's it. Yes, please.
Which versions of Python do you support? So probably
2.6, 3.2, 3.3, 2.7, PyPy 2.1. Yes.
So basically everything which is halfway modern.
Yes, it's all automatically tested with Tux on Jenkins, 100% code coverage.
Let's see friend.
What about different data structures like multi-value disks, for example? Can I use them? So in a for example,
it's literally just dictionaries. You can do whatever you want. You just have to. Your only job is that in the end, you can transform it into something that your logger understands. So maybe you just add some processor which converts this your structure you want into something that's understandable by your logger.
No, I meant on one slide you had where you showed the configure option.
So what do you
Yeah,
mean? This?
you have a context class where you in the end wrap the date. Is it the data type you're really wrapping there, or can I just put in my own data type, providing all the necessary data methods there?
Okay, I skipped some information here because I talked too fast. So context class, that's a class that's used for keeping context inside of your logger.
Okay.
And it can be anything that behaves like a dictionary.
Okay.
So if you want, you can put MongoDB behind it. It doesn't matter. It just has to react to certain dunder methods, so you access it like a dictionary, but you can do whatever you want. This wrapdict is another generic thing that wraps anything that behaves like a dictionary and keeps this dictionary, the instance of the dictionary in a thread local variable.
Okay.
But yeah, I try to keep it as generic as possible. Yes?
So your examples are about writing out JSON, and I completely understand why you want to have JSON if you really want to store structured logs.
Mm-hmm.
But now, assuming that sometimes I might want to have, well, the more traditional logs, bit unstructured, but still using bind and so on. If I see this slide, it looks to me like I could, for example, remove the JSON renderer and basically have all the goodness.
This is the only part where JSON comes to play.
Exactly, so right there. So I can just use all the goodness of no global state and binding and all the stuff.
I'm sorry. I just wanted back to this one. This is really important. This is the only thing that transforms a dictionary of Python values into something your logger understands. Yeah. So if you want, you can rot 13 here or encrypt it or something. It's just up to you. And you can also bind classes to it, which I have an example on the examples page of Structlog where I use a counter and it just gets serialized at the end, and it doesn't matter what value it had in between. It's really just Python. There's nothing special about it in Magic. It's just dictionaries that are copied around and handed through, and in the end, your logger has to understand what comes out of it. Otherwise, yes.
Did you look into using supporting the with statement for context? Very much like the with statement.
I used the with statement at one point. So you don't need a with statement if you use mutable loggers, because you just have to keep one logger around and then you have it back. I use the with statement together with the thread locals, because obviously there you may have the interest to get rid of it again. So there's with temporary bind. But for these I don't, because it doesn't make any sense. If you want to bind something new, just name it differently. Just name it block TMP. And
yeah, but you may want to return to the previous one.
Yes, the old one doesn't get changed.
Yeah, but you have to remember it.
Yes. Well, just a choice. So, as I, yeah, I mean, you can write something very simple one with a statement which just saves it and then restores it or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I said these are three different objects. So if you want to do this only temporarily, just give it a different name, and you're done. Because these objects don't go away. They are garbage collected at some point, but it's a different class. Unless you're using thread locals, then you need to use a with statement with temporary bind. More questions, please. Yes.
What's your experience with the adoption of your library, of your package?
So, I could interpret this question in different ways. So I'm going to interpret it first in a way I like. I've ported all of our internal applications that are very diverse. So it's twisted code, it's pyramids, it's even a bit of Flask. And it saved us a shitload of logging boilerplate code. So, this is production code. It's production ready. It runs. If this wouldn't work, our customers wouldn't be able to read their mails, and my mobile would be ringing. So, yeah, this is not some beta adventure or something like that. This is real solid code. So the adoption in the wild, people use it. Some people use it. Many people don't really understand what it's about. Many people just get hung around with this JSON and start discussing JSON with me, which is not the point. It's just one of the features, and it's useful because all the automated logging tools like JSON. But actually, the real feature is really this incremental context building. This, yeah.
So we already touched the question of journal D, and I understand that as you're using mainly Ubuntu, that's not really of interest to you. But as far as I understand, when I have something like struct log, it would be really easy to interface with systemd or journald, as it also stores structured data. So
that's what I meant.
So this
is
be,
application.
If you want to, if I'm Leonard Peppering at some point and I want to write a nice blog post why yet another one, why journald is the best since sliced bread, whatever.
Yeah.
Then I could use struct log, put a custom logger in or processor in there.
And you would probably replace the logger in this case, yeah. And then you don't even need this, right? You just hand in the dictionary, and your logger takes care of forming it into something that systemd understands. Yeah, it's trivial. So if you would be using something that runs systemd, I would probably have done it already, but we don't. I don't want to write code I'm not using, because that usually doesn't end well. Speculative programming doesn't work.
It's already written, it just needs to be debugged. Cool.
No more questions? Yes.
If you say you're using it productionally, how often do you use the feature to rebind your context inside a specific function of the logger? Or is it just you bind the context right at the beginning and then use this logger inside the function? Or?
I'm rebinding all the time. So for example, in a web application, so it's actually in this example, something like this, it starts out. And then maybe you are checking authentication, which is some kind of code. And then you say either log unauthorized access or the user logged in, then you bind the username to the logger. And so on and so on.
And
you learn about values, and then you bind them in the moment you learn about them. And in between, if something goes wrong before you know it, you can log out the rest.
But I see the problem if your methods get very long. Of course, you can add.
I see the problem as well.
Context, if you split it up into different functions, how do you get the context of the logger transferred into routines you call later on?
Yeah, it depends. So I personally do it like that I do the logging usually in the main function, main view, and signal where something goes wrong or something like that via exceptions. So that's one approach. Otherwise, thread local context. There you go.
Okay.
That's exactly what it's for. Or when you want to log in your subroutines, but don't want thread locals, you can pass around the context, the logger.
Just so I get this right, thread local context means I have one global logger and use it as if it has global state, and just bind to it, and that's it. And every thread has its own context.
You use it exactly like here. So you have.
So I still reassign it, and that stays the same.
Can you rephrase what exactly your question is?
Just to understand the thread local stuff.
Okay, let me explain what thread local means. Thread local really means it's global,
yes,
but only within one thread.
Exactly.
So in the context of web applications, one thread usually means one request.
Yeah.
If you're using synchronous WebSync.
Exactly. If you're not in Twisted, you have different usage patterns. For example, you have protocols, then you have the logger as a class, as an instant attribute. So like
his mind is into Tornado.
Yeah.
Anyways,
just to make sure I understand it right. If I use the thread local stuff, I would just have one global that I bind variables to, and then probably don't even have to reassign it that global at every bind point. Or maybe
yes,
just asking about the usage pattern.
Okay, let me explain one thing. Because this convenience function is in a global scope,
yes,
it gets executed before you can configure anything.
Yes.
So this logger over there is basically not really a logger; it's a proxy which on first use configures itself and stuff like that.
Yes.
So yeah, but that's a global object. That's right.
Yeah.
You still get new objects here. The loggers are still new.
Okay, so
however,
I will have like an application global that has then accumulates the configuration the binds.
So the thing here is that the dictionaries which are used for the context, they are global. It's transparent to you. So the usage pattern would be exactly the same.
Okay.
So you don't do anything differently than this, except that suddenly if you log from some subroutine, you have all the contexts you've bound before too. However, if you have single-threaded evented thing, it just means that everything will explode at your face.
Yeah, of course.
But the usage pattern isn't different. It's exactly the same. It's just the context. The context transparently will take care of the fact that it is.
So in an evented server, I would probably reset or get a new logger whenever I start handling a new user.
Well,
or bind it to
I don't think you can
user callback or something like that and keep it there.
I don't know Tornado enough. I just know that I couldn't use thread locals with Twisted because there's only one thread.
Doesn't make sense.
Does Tornado have some kind of
no.
context somewhere? I think Twisted has something like it, and I wanted to look into the edit too, but yeah, I'm not that opposed to explicit objects and handing around and calling functions with values. It's really cool, you know. You all should try that. So
I will think about it.
But seriously, if Tornado has some kind of I don't know how you call it, a thread of execution in Tornado. I know it's not threads, but something. Maybe you have something like get something. Get context.
You have a request object that is passed around, but yes, you don't have. It's just one single threaded. So
yeah.
When you're implementing, for example, a method like a view, you're basically extending an object, and inside the view you can call self.request.get, and you get the parameters or whatever. Yeah,
that would be like the simple way in Twisted where you just bind your logger to some class or something like that. But I believe that at least Twisted has some way to get something gets request local data or something like that. But I don't know really for sure. But I wouldn't really encourage that. I lost some friends over adding thread locals. I mean, explicit objects are really good, and it's really great to test too. If you think about it, you can easily write a processor which just catches all or collects your log entries, and then you can make assertions against it without a lot of monkey patching. You just have to configure your logger for that.
Anyway, so just one thing, with Tornado you would have something like a self.request.params.get, so it's more or less the same.
Yeah, the question here is how would you if you want to log in some subroutine, because here it's clear you have your object, but the question was what if you have some 5 function calls down the road, and how do you get your logger, or how do you get your context for this logger? And yeah, so
is Tornado is the request object mutable? Can you attach new attributes to a request object?
We usually don't hand our request objects way down into.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. If you are handing something down, you can hand down the logger too. That's not the point. Yeah.
Got some workers down there that do their thing and they don't know anything about requests.
Yeah, but I mean, in the end, you need to have some place to attach content or context, and either you need to hand it down or you have some mechanism by the framework which you usually don't have a
So my personal opinion here is that you just don't log down there. You shouldn't log in your helper routines. Raise an exception and log it out somewhere where no double application. Your helper libraries shouldn't know about logging or something like that. They should just get values in and values out.
Well, depends on the handling. I mean, if I have an error down there,
yeah, and you raise an exception with the error. And then
but I don't want to have it up here where I have the logging, because there's places in between that have the information to handle the error and can add to it and decide which path to follow and stuff like that. So
yeah, my personal take would be that somehow it's always kind of a balance you need to get, because down there you always have the most information and you can handle usually the things because you really know the context, but on the other hand you don't want to splatter around your error handling and your logging all around the application, right? And you need
come on, it's engineering, it's trade-offs.
Yeah, well, too bad.
Yeah, but thanks for the answer. I think I can now.
One question. You said that the feature of extending the existing context, you're using it quite often.
Yeah.
But what about replacing existing keys?
It's all right.
Possible.
Well, again,
these bind to some values without getting exceptions in your framework.
Without getting, how do you mean?
Some slides before, you just bind the user, even
exactly
the user already was bind.
Yeah, they override each other.
Okay.
And if you write here another user, it will override even this because the event obviously has the highest priority.
Okay, I would call it maybe you could call it feature, you could call it any behavior. But my question was, if you're using it productively, are you using this that you override existing keys in your log context? Or do you just don't use it? And
one more thing, you don't really override because this logger will still have this user equals anonymous. This new logger will have all the values that this one has, plus that this value, this key has changed.
Okay, I'm just thinking about what could be the use case for just reassigning the user in your logging context. I mean, if this is the user that is executing my request, why would he change?
Maybe like you don't know it, and at some point you know it and you bind it. This is just an example. And it's actually the reason why I show it, that you can't overwrite your value.
Yeah, I see the feature of assigning new context that is new at the moment. But my question was if you're using it to reassign users, or just overwrite old values. And I mean, in this logger, the old context is hidden.
Well, in this logger it isn't. This logger doesn't ever change, except in thread logger.
Yeah, but in the next line you're just overwriting this variable and you don't have access anymore at this. So this old one is obviously lost. So
but it's okay because you were reusing this variable.
Yeah, sure. So there is the possibility of losing context. So it was just my question if you're using the feature or it's just
it's a feature, yeah. If I wouldn't allow that, people would go bonkers. I don't think. I mean, you could probably, as I said, you can write your own loggers. So you could add a feature of yourself where you look into the context, and if the context is has already this key, then you say no. It's up to you. It's just Python. It's really, But I try to be as flexible as possible.
Okay, I was just not sure which behavior I would prefer. If I would prefer to always getting errors, or if I would prefer just silently overwriting stuff. I mean, my question was just if you're using one of these features productively. So.
To be honest, I'm not sure.
Okay.
But
I would expect this to be very useful if you want to have like some standard keys that are always in your output, and then you can replace them as the actual information or more specific information for them becomes available. So for user, first it would be anonymous, then the authentication code runs, and it replaces the user with the actual user.
Or state.
But is it useful?
Yes, look, I know what. Imagine state.
Always have the same.
Imagine a key called state. Authenticating. State authenticated, state logged out, something like that. It makes total sense to override. At least I cannot dictate it to all of my users that they must not do that.
Okay, yeah, so state could change.
And when you're writing network applications like I do, and there I use it, now I remember, in some twisted code I do it, then you have a lot of state machines, and then it's useful.
Okay, yeah. For state machines.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I think I was...
You always use bind, but you are able to unbind existing keys, right?
There is an unbind. Yeah, this is the answer. There is an unbind which just takes it, copies it, and then deletes the key. It's really just simple dictionary operations. Yes.
If there is no more other questions, and we have 1 minute, I'd like to get the opportunity to get some free consulting out of you because I just had an idea. And I just want to verify that my thinking is along the line of structure. So I get some XML data in, let's say web application, it's a SOAP server, but so this old protocol, 4 letters.
I have a shitload of SOAP running to them.
Apologize. Okay. This is a given protocol, and they have some kind of Matroska puppets, because it's not as easy as just sending one XML file. No, you have them embedded in each other because this Java guy is really like that so much. And obviously, at some point, I get invalid data because the clients I can't control. They usually don't use XML processors to generate their XML, but they treat it as text and
printf.
Use regexes, and sometimes if they find that some kind of line is too long, then they just split it after 1,000 characters and all the stuff. So it's not anymore any kind of somehow valid XML what I might get. Yeah. And so for debugging, and so I can add my nice little workarounds for each little customer, I need to log what I got, for example, and of course I have several stages because at first I'm unwrapping the first XML, checking if it's valid, and I'm doing some pre-processing, and this log bind would be ideal, right? Because at each state I add the variables I have. For example, I'm logging the complete request body I'm getting, and when I parsed it as XML, I could add the pre-printed XML, and when I encounter some error later on, I can just use this context, which is for this log actually, to have some kind of debugging information, like a core dump or so, which contains all the
There's a processor called, which is stolen from Python 3, called stack info. If you hand in stack info equals true, you will get a stack dump as part of your log entry, for example. Yeah. So that would be like adding one line to the configuration and one key value to the log call, and you get the pre-printed log into it.
Maybe another question is, since this is all dictionaries till the end, I probably shouldn't put beautiful state in there.
It depends. You may want it.
True.
Let me show you an example. No, I can't. Maybe I can. I can literally see nothing. I think it's -1.
Oh, Command Plus increases the font size?
No, I wanted to switch those, but okay, I wasn't there yet. Okay. I'm just showing you the doc because I have my internet, and I think it's faster to just show you the actual code. So, how do I get this together? Okay, does anybody know? And everybody's just cringing.
Command plus.
Command plus? No, it's command equals actually. So. Okay, so this is not going to work because even my examples are all tested. So, okay. Yes, this one. you see the counter here, which is just an object which started at 0, and when you call inc, it increases. And this is an echo protocol and twisted. Now we are it. And when a connection is made, you save a counter, and here you have a logger. I use new here for consistency purposes. You don't need new when you're not using thread local data. If you're using thread local data and you can't rule out that your threads won't get reused, you should use new because it erases the context before it returns it. So this is very useful. You can add connection IDs, UID4s in web applications, and then you can just correlate all your entries. You can say, okay, which log entries relate to this request? Click, you get them all. But what I want to show you is this one. There's this key count, and it has this counter over here. And whenever data is received, this counter gets increased. The data gets bound, and it gets written back, and it gets locked. And here's the result. You have appear the connection ID, which changes every single time, and the counter counts up. But it's all the time the same object. So yeah, it's mutable, and it's in this case it's the key value renderer, which just calls wrapper on the methods. So you get a value out of it. So yeah, you can use it for good stuff. I'm not saying you should do, but was the question? It was you, right? No, this is Martin. Ah, okay. So yes, you can. It's just a dictionary. I'm not your kindergartner. You can attach whatever you want, and it can be useful. It doesn't have to. Mm-hmm. Maybe you just want a snapshot of something that's going right now. Maybe a number of connections or something like that, and it gets logged out with every entry, and you know whatever was going on in that moment, some snapshot value. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they are consenting adults, as Raymond Hettinger likes to say. So yeah, more questions? I would like to ask the people who asked me about hanging around loggers, how do you do it now? How do you get your values down there so you log all the proper context?
Oh, it doesn't have proper context. That's why I'm here.
Good. So yeah, this is one way to get it in there.
So maybe something like the final question. I don't know if it makes any sense, but nevertheless, does it interplay somehow with a logging package or module in the standard library? Or?
Yes, it comes with tools that integrated with standard library and with Twisted, because of the two things I'm using. So it's really easy to get started with those two. It doesn't do anything special, but it tries to behave as unsurprising as possible, and it tries to not break your code. So ideally, you should be able to just wrap your loggers and be done with it. And it just keeps working, except that your log entries look a bit different.
Or not. Or not, if you just don't use, if you use the same processes as before.
Well, if you wrap your logger, then your log entries will look like before, except there will be event equals. And again, it really depends on the last processor. So if you want, you can log out XML. You can log directly into your database. You don't have to use JSON. You don't have to use key values. You can use whatever you want. You just
what? 13. I like that the best.
Yeah. Or AES.
Def random.
This is really useful here, by the way. If you so if you don't want to keep a huge context with you around, for example, if you're using thread locals and you don't want to put too much stuff into it, then just bind an ID to it and then do more log entries and keep less in your context, and you can just correlate it. When you're using something like logstash, it's just one click. You click on the ID and you get all the entries for the ID.
More questions? No more questions.
But I guess that's fine, right?
Thank you very much, Hinek.